Thank you, Premier. Can I please ask to join us on stage the New South Wales Minister for Planning and Public Spaces, the Honourable Rob Stokes. While he's getting up on stage and while you're both getting settled in, based on the conversation that we had over lunch, you need to know that we could talk up here all day. So you need to ask questions. You can do so by putting up your hand and a microphone will come to you, and if you could introduce yourself and where you're from before you ask the question. But if you're timid and you want to go the other way, you can also open up your browser, type in pigeonhole, CEDA.pigeonhole.at, and the passcode is State of New South Wales. So lots of ways for all of you to engage in the conversation, and you are going to have to make sure you do so. Otherwise, as I said, we'll just chat up here all afternoon. Premier, thanks for your remarks. I'll get started while you're thinking of your questions. Thanks for your remarks. I think, you know, one of the things that's just so fascinating and challenging, really, when you think about planning, and I'm sure both of you will have views on this, is just, you know, you're making decisions today that set the foundations for opportunity for literally decades to come. And I was reflecting just on how quickly that can change and you know, how things that you think are going to happen don't happen, and how you have to adapt to that. And I'll give you the specific examples that you spoke partway through about the role of digital and everything the government's doing in that space. And I can remember, you know, 10 years ago when everyone was saying, you know, digital was going to mean that fewer people would be coming into the CBD, that we would be able to actually have more people working remotely, that this would reduce pressure on CBD infrastructure. And in fact, recently I was at a dinner with a whole bunch of CFOs who were saying the exact opposite is now happening. And they're re-centralising into the CBD because that's where people want to be, and there's this sort of concentration effect that wasn't at all what people expected. So how do you think about that? And when you're making decisions for an area like Western Sydney, what do you think the priorities are, and how do you provide this, the agility and the adaptability as well as the certainty?
Yeah. I think the important thing to note is government should provide really good infrastructure and services, and whether it's through digital economy or other methods, to really provide choices for our citizens. It's not up to us to decide what our citizens choose to do. But we always have to think about what is going to give our state the edge, what is going to drive economic growth, and what is going to create the jobs that people want. And I'm very pleased to say that because of our three-city strategy, we're in the eastern city, the first city, Parramatta is the second CBD, and then we have the third city we're building outside the new airport. Each of those will be mega attractions for jobs, and in fact, if you look at the way Parramatta is changing, many global brands are now shifting their headquarters to Parramatta. If you look at Macquarie Park, so we are seeing a decentralisation of jobs. Yes, some jobs that are sought after are still here, but in the future, and I say this quite often, if someone's standing in Parramatta, they'll be looking west for the best advanced manufacturing jobs. So it is about governments driving the agenda in terms of creating the centres of excellence. And I'm sure Minister Stokes has also got comment on this, but when we're talking precincts or new cities, many jurisdictions are grappling with how do you deal with that integration? What authority do you have to ensure that the right skills in education, jobs and also livability factors are contained within a geographic region so that people don't have to travel hours to go somewhere? I mean, we are building metros, we are building better road networks as well, so congestion is reducing and travel times are getting much better. I mean, the M4 tunnels have reduced travel times by 50 minutes a day for some commuters, which is huge. The North West Rail Line's reduced travel times as well. But our vision for the state is about having self-contained cities or regions which have the best jobs, education and livability index. But how you manage that is really the challenge for us, and the planning reforms we outlined will address some of those issues. Do you want to comment on that, Rob?
Thanks, Premier. The only thing I'd add to that is that the planning system should be about enabling opportunity, enabling jobs, enabling economic growth. It has become, in some ways, where planning is a constraint on investment, that's where we have a problem. And that's why we need to be much more strategic in our planning system and less reactive in our planning system.
Absolutely. Now, we've got a question from the audience because I've got questions queued up on my Pigeonhole app if we don't have... All right. So, so the good thing about this app is people can lodge questions and they get to vote. So you get the most popular questions. So first cap off the rank is something that Paul touched on in his comments, which is around the private sector working with government.
Yeah.
And so the question is, what do you see the role of the private sector in helping you to achieve your objectives?
Well, we certainly wouldn't be able to have 48 mega projects and 700 infrastructure projects underway across the state if it wasn't for the private sector. But I don't think there's an area of government where we don't rely on the expertise of the private sector. But success only happens when we have good people both in government and private sector working together to deliver a great outcome. And governments can't function in an isolated bubble. So we rely on best practice. I always say to my team when they put proposals forward, what is going to deliver best practice? And we don't want to compare ourselves to best in Australia, but best in world. And the private sector has a lot of that expertise, so does government. And I think it's when you collaborate that can really get the better outcomes. But it would be difficult for me to grapple with an area of government delivery, service delivery, where we don't have the private sector or the community sector involved in one way or another. And that's the way it should be. Because that's the way we get to success. But I would see that enhanced in the future. I mean, there are parts of social service delivery which in the past the private and government sector, the private and community sector were locked out of, and we're very proud to say that we opened that up because we believe expertise isn't confined to government and it's a collaboration that really works. And but also, having said that, sometimes in the past we've had to insource something to improve it before we've outsourced it again. So it's really about making sure we have the best capabilities in both the private sector and government working together to deliver those outcomes. Yeah,
can I just ask a follow-up question on that? I mean, I think the point about looking for innovative delivery of human services, something obviously that organisations like the Productivity Commission have been very focused on, making clear that there isn't one sector alone that can meet these challenges of rising expectations, rising costs. But one of the key things, I think, to enabling that to happen is, one, having the courage to innovate and to rely and work with other sectors, but also, two, being careful around how you measure outcomes and transparency so that the community knows that no matter who's delivering it, they get the outcomes that they need. So what's your government done that helps to build confidence in that space?
This is a really important question because you always get the answers to the questions you ask. But I always ask our people, are we asking the right questions? Are we measuring the right things? But at the end of the day, the measurements always have to be around quality, whether it's quality of service, whether it's, for example, in the sensitive area of child protection that's something you can measure because you want children to be reunited with their families or else in a safe environment for a period of time. But in other areas, it's more difficult to measure depending on what you're looking at. And I think the key thing is for us to be asking the right questions, but also having real-time measure of how we're going on things. So now through our financial management transformation, a program which Treasury and others have been working on, we can get real-time information on the programs we're providing and the outcomes we're getting. But we will always push ourselves to make sure we're asking the right question. And it even goes down to when you're building a project. When you're asking the private sector to come and help you build something, you shouldn't tell them what colour it needs to be and how long it needs to be. You should say to the private sector, instead of saying, we're building a road and this is what it has to look like, we're building a road, what do you think it should look like? And asking the questions more broadly, and that's how you get innovation. We can't be so prescriptive and descriptive that you lose the ability to innovate and get that expertise.
Rob, did you want to add anything?
Well, certainly we've got to ask those quantitative questions, but also qualitative questions as well. And the Premier's asked me, given me some KPIs in relation to obviously housing numbers. We need to keep delivering more and more houses for a growing community, but also job numbers as well, so that we make sure that the developments we're assessing are producing tens and tens of thousands of new job opportunities every year. But as well as this, some of the less tangible but equally important elements to building a city around good design and the way in which we seek to measure these things is, as the Premier's already referred to, increasing urban tree canopy, for example, increasing access of the community to great quality parklands and open, urban, safe, accessible spaces. So they're expressed in quantitative terms, but they point to qualitative measures.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, just racing up the vote list here. Is Intercity high-speed rail on the agenda for New South Wales in the next decade? This has got 36, 37 votes. It's just flying up the charts here.
The short answer is yes. We actually engaged a professor from the UK who's an expert in fast rail, faster rail and fast rail, to actually provide us with advice on if we were to introduce fast rail in New South Wales, where would the first route be? And the question always in relation to fast rail is an interesting one, because it can actually create population centres. Do you deliver for what's there already, or do you deliver to increase population centres in the future? And so we've committed to starting at least one of these routes this term of government in relation to providing faster rail. So we're not going to get from where we are now to 380 kilometres an hour in the next few years, but we can definitely shave an hour or 2 hours off travel times depending on where people are coming from, and we're looking at the best way to do that. So we'll have something to say about that in the near future, actually.
Can I follow up a question to both of you? And I think this is a really, it's sort of where I started the conversation around how you think about long-term planning. And I think sometimes in the community there's a sense that planning is very responsive. You know, today we've got X million people, so many drive a car. Tomorrow we're going to have Y million people, so we're going to have that many cars and we need that many more roads. But yet there's these big shifts that you can affect through policy as well, and a bit of, you know, do you build fast rail to where people are today or where you want them to be tomorrow? And it's a bit of the conversation that the CEO of the Business Council put on the table this week around not just 3 cities in Sydney, but regional development and how we think about our regional towns and potentially cities, which I think begs a big infrastructure question and planning question, which isn't about necessarily where people are today, but where it might make sense for them to be in the future. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it relates to the previous question, but I'll always never shy away from long-term plans. I mean, our government has 5 and 10-year plans. We've also got 20 and 50-year plans. Often governments are criticised for not having medium to long-term plans, but that's certainly been part of our government's agenda. And it's interesting because the fast rail work that we've had commissioned for us really asks us to answer that question. Do we want to increase, or do we want to reduce travel times for people according to where they live now? Do we want to focus more on creating jobs within communities so people don't have to travel those distances? Or do you use better connectivity to actually build new centres of population which currently don't exist? So we're asking ourselves all those questions, and I think the answer lies in a combination of those things. But we also have to consider, obviously, where people want to live and where they want to work is the first question you answer. It's really the quality of life issue that you should answer first. But I also do think there is potential for us to grow our regional cities. I mean, notwithstanding the terrible drought and the fires that are unfortunately hitting many of our communities, we still grew 40,000 jobs in our regions this year. The rest of Australia grew 5,000. So we're doing something right, and I think there's enormous potential to grow some of our regional centres and really have them contribute to economic growth as well as greater quality of life and lifestyle choices for citizens. So I think you need to answer a combination of those questions, and the Minister for Planning might have something to add on that.
Thanks, Premier. Thanks, Melinda. I think planning is also, an element of it is about prophecy and imagining what the future will look like and seeking to also guide that and shape that future. It's the process by which society makes decisions about its future. So it's incredibly important. We won't always get that right, and we need to learn from the mistakes of the past. I remember chatting to a fellow called Henry Wardlaw, who was the state's planner back in the early 60s. And we were chatting some years ago, and I was asking him about congestion in this particular part of Sydney and saying, you know, how did you get this so wrong? And he said, we didn't get it wrong at all. Well, what do you mean? You know, these local streets are congested, they're parked out, you know, what went wrong? And he said, no, we got the demographics right, we got everything right, population increase right, everything. The only thing we didn't think about was that women would not be working at home, but they would be in the workforce. Yeah. So we perfectly designed our road network for half the number of cars. And it was just one example of where something that no one anticipated would happen happened. And so one of the things that we are looking at currently as part of this program of reform is our business zones. For commercial zones, we have a whole variety of different zones that, and this is something I know concerned the Treasurer a great deal in terms of boosting productivity, because in the past we sought to define and segregate our land uses. Now, between heavy industrial, light industrial, and separate all these uses. The way in which our economy has become disrupted over the past few years is effectively we need to now think just in terms of employment. And whatever happens in these places is really a matter for investment and for capital to make those decisions. And planning is merely to facilitate it and not to say you must only do these things over here or over there.
Really interesting point. I like the comment on workforce participation. Okay, so also moving fast up the charts, you might anticipate this one. New South Wales, what are you doing around increasing renewables and incentivising citizens to create community energy hubs?
I'm proud to say New South Wales actually has the largest renewable projects in the nation happening right here. And we believe very much that we, as a government and as a nation, need to provide ongoing certainty so that we can encourage investment. But we have a pipeline of renewable projects that we're very excited about in New South Wales, and we're looking forward to those coming to fruition. But we also believe in providing certainty and goalposts for the market to respond to that environment. And certainly we're open to business in that regard, that's what I'll say. But that's also hand in hand with our energy security requirements. So we believe we've got a very good balance in New South Wales. Other states have moved way too quickly to renewables, and so every summer when there's very hot days, they rely on New South Wales to provide energy into the grid so they can load shed. We're not in that situation, touch wood. We have a good balance here where we've got traditional sources of energy, but also a good pipeline of renewables coming into the market as well at a manageable pace.
I've got a question in the middle of the room, if we can head towards Megan. Thank you. Oh.
Can't hear you, John.
Sorry, if you could... There we go.
Premier, thanks for your address today, and some great news coming out of New South Wales. It's really a question, and it's not about the elephant in the room. It's really about the reform of the planning processes that you've talked about, and which obviously anyone in the business of major developments would be applauding. And we've talked about the need to have various councils under the microscope in terms of what they are doing or not doing. How will that reflect the government's relationship with the City of Sydney? Because often there seems to be some turf wars between Macquarie Street and Town Hall around development in the CBD.
Well, one thing I'll say is we'll put our hands up first and say we're the first ones to be held accountable. So we will also be part of that system whereby any development of which the state government has a role will be completely transparent in terms of where it's up to, where the proponent's up to, where the EIS is up to, so that everybody can hold us to account, and we'll compare ourselves to other states. So I just wanted to make the point up front that we will be holding ourselves accountable, as well as every other metropolitan local government area. And we won't be excluding anybody from that, because if you believe that what you're doing is right, if you believe your systems are good, well then you should make those public and make those processes transparent. And transparency is important, and sometimes it's very easy to shift blame. It's easy to blame the state government or the council or the proponent. But if you have everything online in real-time information, it will be very obvious to everybody as to where the bottleneck is, if there is one. And it's that level of transparency which we think will make us best in nation, because our e-planning system is only in its formation, but the councils that have participated have done an amazingly great job in highlighting exactly where all the DAs are up to and where any potential bottlenecks are. And that transparency then puts pressure on various parties to do the right thing. But I believe very strongly that if you're well motivated, if you believe your decision making is sound and your processes are good, well then that transparent process through e-planning will make that publicly available. And Rob, if there's anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, thank you, Premier. Thanks, John. We've got a great relationship with the city. We want to continue to progress that. They have strong capacity to be a partner in strategic planning. Certainly one plan that has taken a long time to come to fruition is the Central Sydney Planning Strategy, and that's something we're working hand in glove with to determine that as quickly as possible. And we strongly believe that if we work together, what's the saying, the whole can be greater than the sum of the parts. Together with the resources of the city and the state, we can drive really good outcomes for everyone.
But I'm also happy to say that if there's a major strategic decision, state government trumps, in that situation. If there's something that's in the best interest of the state, and I'm happy to wear the flag, because at the end of the day, we wouldn't have built half the projects we have going on in New South Wales if state government hadn't said this is necessary to support the majority of our citizens into the future. And sometimes state governments have to make those calls, so long as you do it in a transparent, proper way. But having said that, I believe the e-planning system, which we will make mandatory, will provide that level of transparency which isn't always there. And that also, I have to say to everybody in the room, puts pressure on proponents. Sometimes proponents take too long in responding to environmental concerns or responding to other issues. This puts heat on every person in the process, so that if something does get held up, we can look at the system and say, well, that's the reason, or that's the reason, and address it, rather than constantly dealing with speculation or blame game. I think a real-time, upfront, transparent system reduces any conflict, but also improves the public's ability to gauge what's really happening.
Question here, thank you.
Thanks, Melinda. Megan Motto, CEO of the Governance Institute of Australia and also Chair of CEDA here in New South Wales. Thanks for a fascinating presentation this morning, and it really is great to see the progress of New South Wales. I had a bit of a different question around data, and you mentioned data analytics being used to drive both services and policy outcomes, and you've mentioned in your previous response just now the e-planning system, but you also talked about education outcomes and outcomes in a number of other, I know social services, for example, are really key to what's in your thoughts at the moment. I'm wondering what mechanisms you've got internally and what conversations are happening in place in government to balance the really tricky ethical questions around data analytics, about how you can balance the trade-offs that happen invariably when you're using data between privacy and transparency and those services outcomes that you're looking for.
No, that is a great question, and our ability to move further in this space is definitely, in a positive way, restricted by privacy concerns. So our government has, at various levels, a very strong and healthy relationship with the Privacy Commissioner, but there's no reason why government can't be better at dealing with anonymous data or data which provides the private sector with opportunities to support what we're doing. And I'll give you one example. When we shared real-time information on our transport timetables a few years ago, the private sector spent we got all the experts in the room over a weekend, and they spent about $10,000 to $20,000 developing 4 apps which are now using government's data to provide real-time information to commuters. And we could have spent millions trying to do it ourselves, but when we provided our own data, which obviously didn't have any privacy issues because it was that opened the opportunity for the private sector to develop those great apps. Similarly, we can use data in a whole range of things which do not have any privacy concerns whatsoever. But within government, where there are privacy issues and we get a tick off from the Privacy Commissioner, you can actually provide better services to people. You'll often find, for example, disadvantaged people touch a number of points in government, but their details are known separately and in silos to different parts of government. But if you had a better human view of the person to say, what are they needing, what's their real problem, how can we help them, it actually gives them a better outcome and saves government departments doing things over and over again. We also have, through the Minister for Customer Service, a wonderful policy which we're calling Tell Us Once, So at the moment, if you have a challenge or something you want to find from government, you might have to go to a number of different sources. We're saying, no, just go through Service New South Wales, tell us once and we'll fix it for you. But if you're happy to give us your information, we're happy to provide you with that service. And one example is our Energy Switch program. If you're comfortable with telling us your account details for your current energy program, we can then ring all the retailers and get you the best deal possible. And on average, some people are saving more, but on average, people are saving $420 a year if they give us that information. So it's completely voluntary, but there's no doubt that is a new frontier for us. But we are getting really good as a government. I mean, how many governments around the world have a data analytics centre, a customer behaviour centre? I mean, we're really looking at data and driving better outcomes. And instead of waiting a few hours to get a new driver's licence, it takes you a few minutes and you can get it on your phone. So we've come a long way and there's a lot more to do.
Premier, can I just add my comment to that? I think we released a report recently on disrupting disadvantage, and we actually looked to some of the examples of the New South Wales government and how you're using data for good, as we describe it. And we actually think there's real scope to do more with that and to try to get ahead of disadvantage through using data to be able to identify and deliver more tailor-made sort of bespoke services to people in need to avoid a history of entrenched disadvantage being continued or initiated. And I think was saying to the Minister for Planning at the table, New South Wales has done some really innovative stuff in this space and in sharing data with communities. I know in the Burke community, the sharing of data with that community has enabled them to actually improve outcomes for young Aboriginal people that would otherwise not have been able to be achieved. And so there's lots of risk in it, but I just wanted to applaud your government for being courageous and tackling those in a way that is still, touch wood, engendering community support. Can I change topic? And I'm going to try to... Oh, sorry. Is there a question? Sorry, I'll turn this way. I don't want to ignore this. Way over there. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Namoy Dougal, Southern Sydney Regional Organisation of Council. Premier, you referred to innovative procurement at the state level, but of course New South Wales councils do hundreds of millions of dollars worth of procurement, and my organisation does aggregation of that procurement. And we're no longer in a century where we're procuring widgets. We're now doing things like very large electricity contracts with renewables. We're actually doing genuine circular economy work with the thousands of kilometres of road sheeting, which will include glass and hopefully soon plastics. But we can't do this effectively, efficiently, and give back to our community in the best ways with some very, very restrictive procurement regulations. Are they going to change?
Well, please feel free to forward to us specifically what you think the procurement restrictions are, but certainly through Infrastructure New South Wales and our agencies, we've worked hard with industry to improve our procurement processes. In fact, recently we did kind of a health check with industry because we know one of the biggest challenges and opportunities that exists for our state is having the right people with the right skills to service all the projects we're building or service all the frontline services that require expert skills. And so we did a health check with industry, and industry gave us feedback to say you need to kind of address this and this to actually ensure the supply chain of skills and also products is coming through. So we did that, and we went back to industry and revised some of our practices. But if any level of government has suggestions they'd like to bring forward to us, we're only too pleased to listen to them. But also in local government, part of our challenge and opportunity at the same time is to really address some capacity issues. Some councils are fantastic at being able to procure services and provide good services. Other councils are less good at it. So there is inconsistency across the board. But if there are any opportunities for us to revisit what we're doing, please let us know. But we also find that the way that we do procure and provide procurement policies allow, obviously the big players are there for all our mega projects, but we're also really keen to make sure small and medium-sized businesses always have an opportunity, either as subcontractors or directly have opportunities to increase their activity in New South Wales as well.
A related question was actually where I was going to head, which is the federal government's been talking a lot about cutting red tape. One of the questions I have here is around cutting red tape and reducing timelines and timeframes in the planning system. So I think that's obviously a priority for the audience, but also more broadly, this issue of red tape and how we get that cut through, also as a source of productivity, and I know you've got a big productivity agenda, so you might want to touch on that as well.
I know, definitely. We are always enthused when we are able to reduce the number of processes or steps it takes to do something, and that's part of our mission. And I feel we have made substantial progress, but there's always more to do. And Service New South Wales has really allowed us to be the shop front for our citizens in terms of reducing red tape. So we often think to ourselves, what government process that we're obviously responsible for causes people stress or angst, and how can we improve that? So that's the first question we ask, and how does it touch everybody? So we're always looking at opportunities to reduce red tape, and there's this program we have now for small business in particular gives small business one contact with government to do all of their either start-up support or ongoing support, rather than have them having to navigate what are a significant number of agencies. So it's always our ongoing mission, a KPI for all ministers and all departments to reduce red tape, reduce processes. It's a win-win because it helps our businesses and customers and citizens, but it also reduces our costs. So it's a win-win for everybody, and it's really part of the digitisation of our economy and our government services that we really are striving for. I don't know if Rob wants to add anything.
Well, certainly we've got some clear quantitative targets in relation to red tape reduction in the planning system, so we're aiming for another 10% reduction of what we've already halved in terms of major project assessment timeframes. But e-planning certainly has proven to speed up processing times. I know Wendy Waller here is here from Liverpool City Council, and their experience of e-planning has seen extraordinary reductions in the time that it's taken council officers to process planning applications. Similarly, Northern Beaches Council, I know that Mayor Regan's here as well. That's another council that's part of our pilot of e-planning. That's been enormously successful in reducing assessment timeframes. But also what we need to do as part of these reforms is recognising the capacity of the planning system, not just to be sort of computer says yes or no and provide a yes or no at the end of a process, but rather to help applicants determine how that an application can be made even better. That processes of public consultation and participation are not designed to stop things, but rather to provide advice back as to how a proposal can be shaped to provide an even bigger public benefit.
Well, that's probably not a bad note to finish on. I might now take the opportunity to invite Shane Higgins to the stage to do the vote of thanks. Shane's the General Manager for New South Wales and ACT for Cardno. Thank you.